In 1929, in the Topkapi Palace in Istanbul, they found a map drawn on gazelle skin, dated 1513. It showed a continent that wasn't officially discovered until 307 years after that map was made. The coastline of that continent was drawn with an accuracy we could only verify in 1958 using seismic equipment. The mapmaker had been dead for 400 years. The equipment didn't exist. The continent hadn't been officially discovered, but the map was accurate. I cover maps, chronological anomalies, and archival documents that don't fit the official version of history. If you want to know what old atlases are hiding, subscribe. New material every week. The official history of cartography is clean and logical. In antiquity, people knew the Mediterranean and the lands around it. In the Middle Ages, trade routes added Asia and northern Africa. In the 15th century, Columbus crossed the Atlantic and opened America to the European world. In the 16th century, Magellan sailed around the globe and proved that Earth was one connected ocean. Every discovery built on the one before it. Every new map was more accurate than the last. Everything was progressive. Everything made sense. By this logic, maps from the 1500s should show only what had been explored by that point. The Southern Ocean was a blank. Antarctica was guesswork and imagination. Everything south of Cape Horn, according to the official timeline, was unknown until 1820, when the Russian expedition of Bellingshausen first laid eyes on the frozen continent. The Piri Reis map gets a simple explanation from mainstream science. An Ottoman admiral gathered 20 old sources, compiled them, and partially guessed at the outlines of a southern continent, drawing on the ancient theory of Terra Australis. That theory went back to Ptolemy. The ancient Greeks believed a large continent had to exist in the southern hemisphere to balance the weight of the Earth. Piri Reis, according to the official version, simply drew what the Greeks had predicted in theory. It's a convenient explanation. It closes the question in a single paragraph. It lets everyone move on without stopping to look at the details. But the details are exactly what the official version carefully avoids. Because the details don't fit the explanation, the details point somewhere else entirely. Official science doesn't explain the accuracy. It explains why a continent appears on the map, but it does not explain why the coastline of that continent matches the sub-ice terrain hidden under miles of glacial ice. And it doesn't explain why the same thing happens across 4 independent maps made by different people in different countries over 2 centuries. In 1960, History of Science professor Charles Hapgood sent a copy of the Piri Reis map to the cartographic section of the United States Air Force Strategic Air Command. Not to enthusiasts, not to amateurs, to professional military cartographers working with the most precise geodetic data available at the time. The response came back, signed by Captain Lorenzo Burrows, an official document on United States Armed Forces letterhead, not a personal opinion, an official conclusion from a military agency. It stated the following: the coastline depicted in the lower portion of the Piri Reis map corresponds to the subglacial terrain of Antarctica as determined through seismic surveys conducted during the International Geophysical Year of 1957 and 1958. The document then stated directly, the accuracy of this mapping cannot be explained in terms of the geographical knowledge available in the 16th century. Military cartographers don't do conspiracy theory. They work with data. This meant one thing. Someone had mapped the terrain of a continent buried under miles of ice with an accuracy that was physically impossible to achieve by any known method in 1513. Coincidence as an explanation stopped working, because coincidence doesn't have that kind of precision. Coincidence doesn't reproduce itself 4 times independently. Coincidence doesn't get official confirmation from a military cartographic agency. But this was only the beginning, because the Piri Reis map is not an isolated case. It is the first document in a long chain that stretches across 2 centuries and several continents, and every link in that chain makes the official explanation less credible, because the cartographers who drew what they shouldn't have known didn't know each other. They worked in different countries, in different eras, with different sources, but they drew the same thing, with the same precision, the same details of a continent that officially didn't exist for any of them. That's not coincidence. That's a source, a shared source that cartographers across different eras had access to, a source that existed long before any of them picked up a pen. The Piri Reis map shows Antarctica without ice cover, with rivers, mountain ranges, bays, and capes that today lie hidden under glacial ice, 1 to 4 kilometers thick. Ice began covering Antarctica approximately 6,000 years ago, which means the map shows the continent as it existed before the Ice Age began. Piri Reis himself wrote an explanation in the margins. He noted that he used approximately 20 sources. Among them, maps he describes as very ancient, going back to the time of Alexander the Great. He openly stated that he was compiling from materials that were thousands of years older than himself. This means a cartographic tradition existed, a system of knowledge that was passed down, copied, and preserved, one that contained information about a world officially unknown at the time. Now look at the map from 1531. French mathematician Orontius Finaeus publishes a world map. In the southern hemisphere sits an enormous continent. Its dimensions precisely match Antarctica. The coastline corresponds to the sub-ice terrain. An independent source, an independent author, the same precision. 1559, Turkish cartographer Hadji Ahmed publishes a map featuring a southern continent with detailed terrain. Again independently. Again accurately. Again a continent that had not been officially discovered. 1737. French cartographer Philippe Buache publishes a map of Antarctica showing the continent divided into 2 parts by an underwater mountain range. That range, the Transantarctic Mountains, was confirmed only in 1958 through seismic surveys. 4 independent cartographers, 4 different countries, 200 years apart. The same continent, the same details. Details that were physically impossible to observe from the surface in any of those eras. But the anomaly doesn't stop at Antarctica. The Piri Reis map shows the western coast of Africa with an accuracy researchers estimate at less than 0.5% margin of error. That's more precise than many European maps from the 1700s, made after systematic expeditions had already charted those waters. The map uses spherical trigonometry for its projection. The reference point, based on calculations, appears to be in the vicinity of Cairo. Accurately plotting the relative coordinates required knowledge of Earth's circumference with less than 1% margin of error. The officially accepted measurement of Earth's circumference wasn't established until the 19th century. This means the sources Piri Reis was working from didn't just contain geographical data. They contained mathematical knowledge that was 3 centuries ahead of official science. Anomalous maps are not the only trail. Running parallel is another body of evidence pointing to the same place. Medieval Mediterranean navigational charts, known as portolans, demonstrate coastline accuracy that by all calculations required instruments that didn't exist until the 1700s. The Dolcert portolan of 1339 shows the Mediterranean with a precision that modern researchers using computer analysis rate as comparable to 20th century maps. In 1339, there was no chronometer, no accurate sextant, no method for determining longitude. Arab geographer al-Idrisi in the 12th century produced a map of the Indian Ocean coastline that was more accurate than European maps from the 1500s. The sources he used, he himself described as far more ancient. In 2001, a Chinese map was discovered dated to 1418. It shows both American continents, Australia, and Antarctica. According to the official timeline, China had not reached America before the late 15th century. The pattern is always the same: accuracy that outpaces the officially available technology, across different cultures, across different eras, on different continents. But the most important thing isn't the maps themselves. The most important thing is what disappeared from them. Beginning in the 13th century, European maps start showing a vast empire to the east. It is called Tartaria. It stretches from the Pacific Ocean to Eastern Europe. By the 1700s, Tartaria appears on maps as the largest empire on Earth, larger than all European kingdoms combined. These maps were produced by the royal cartographers of France, Britain, and the Netherlands, published in atlases used by navies and governments. Then, in the 19th century, Tartaria began disappearing from the maps. Not all at once, gradually. As European imperial powers redrew the world to reflect their own territorial claims, Tartaria shrank, fragmented, and was eventually replaced by the names of modern nations. By 1900, Tartaria had been so thoroughly removed from the official narrative that most educated Europeans and Americans had never heard of it. By 1950, historians were comfortably stating that no real empire had ever existed, just a geographic term, a vague medieval designation with no political content. But the maps exist, hundreds of them, produced by the most authoritative cartographic institutions in the world over 5 centuries. And they all show the same thing: a massive civilization in the northern latitudes of the Eurasian continent that simply ceased to exist in the official record. The Piri Reis map sat in the archives of Topkapi Palace for 400 years. It wasn't lost, it didn't burn, it wasn't destroyed. It simply sat where no one was looking for it, until German theologian Gustav Adolf Deismann stumbled across it during a library inventory. Hapgood published his findings in 1966. The book came out. It was read by specialists. In manuscript form, it had received a letter of support from Albert Einstein, and it was ignored by the academic establishment. Reviews boiled down to one argument: accepting Hapgood's conclusions would require rewriting the entire timeline of human civilization. This is not a conspiracy in the classic sense. It's a mechanism. Academic institutions are funded by grants. Grants are awarded within existing paradigms. A researcher who publishes data that destroys the paradigm loses funding, archive access, and professional reputation. The system preserves itself not because anyone issues orders, but because every participant has a personal incentive not to ask uncomfortable questions. Careers are built on confirming the existing model, not on dismantling it. Here's a concrete example. In 2004, researchers at the University of Massachusetts conducted a computer analysis of the Piri Reis map's projection. The results confirmed the use of spherical trigonometry and an accuracy that was impossible by 16th century standards. The paper was published in a specialized journal on the history of cartography. Not a single major publication cited it. Not a single textbook mentioned it. Not because the data was false, but because the data was inconvenient. The mechanism of silence operates not through prohibitions, but through the absence of interest. Buache published his map of Antarctica in 1737 at the Académie Royale des Sciences, the leading scientific institution in France at the time. The map was presented as based on earlier sources. No one asked what those sources were. When seismic data in 1958 confirmed the underwater ridge that Buache had drawn 200 years earlier, it did not trigger a re-examination of cartographic history. It was called a coincidence. The cartographer had guessed, by accident, without sources. But coincidence doesn't reproduce itself 4 times. Coincidence doesn't get confirmed by military cartographers. Coincidence doesn't leave a documentary trail in the form of an official conclusion on United States Armed Forces letterhead. What happened to these maps was not coincidence and not negligence. It was managed forgetting, methodical, consistent, and successful enough to last more than 100 years. In 1513, Piri Reis wrote in the margins of his map that he had used sources that were very ancient. He didn't know what exactly he was depicting. He was copying, passing forward what he had received from someone who lived long before him.